Very good.
Welcome. Hello and welcome. I'm recording this video because today I did a blunder in the live session on Zoom. I forgot to click on the button for record. So and after doing the whole session for 1 hour, I realized that it's not done. It's not recorded. So now I'm doing this recording again just to share it with all the people who were part of the session and also all the people who are part of this course. So I just hope that this time it will go fine. So since it is a recorded version, I will not go into the deep discussion mode, but more like lecture mode. And we will cover the essential topics, essential things, essential ideas that we cover in the live session. So first thing that I would like to talk here is the initiation of into psychological type, means how we should start studying the type. It is important to study the type. No, in order to study the type, it is important that we look at trait and type and this relationship, because understanding this relationship is very important. Through that, we can put type and study of type in proper perspective. So traits are actually originated because of the interaction of type and the environment. So if we take the example from the world of photography and videography, type is something that explains to you how the whole dynamics work. It's the whole movie. It's the explanation of the whole movie. And trait is a snapshot of that. And by collecting different snapshots, you can understand the dynamics. So if you let's say take the trait test of a person when the person is at 10-year-old, 15-year-old, 20-year-old, 35-year-old, you will see how this trait is maturing and what would be at some time they will, by the definition, the trait is kind of something relatively very, very stable. So by taking these different snapshots, you can see how the trait is being formed. And type explains why and how it was formed. So that is the entire context of understanding type. Now, the idea of type is actually very deep, and it even has in biology, for example, we have some typical differences, and typical as in related to type, not typical as which is observed most types, though it is roughly the same thing. So biologically, extroversion and introversion are two different ways of organisms to adapt to its environment. So Jung was the first person actually to give the term extraversion and introversion. Before that, there were people who used the term extroverted, introverted, but they were not having more psychological meaning, but they were having more like a trait-like meaning, means description, not the dynamics. So if you look at biology or, organisms in general, organisms adapt themselves to the changes of environment in two distinct ways. There are some organisms which adapt by having a low defense against the external calamity and short life, but very high fertility rate. So some organisms adapt by reproducing a lot of offsprings. There are other organisms which adapt by self-preservation and long life, but having low fertility rate. So this attitude which is present in the organism at biological level can be understood by the idea of introversion and extroversion. So extroverted attitude is high fertility, means high spread and low defense. So that gives this trait of extroverted people are more interested into dispersing everywhere, going everywhere, being everywhere, and at the same time having very high sense of changing. They adapt to the environment wherever they live. So if an extroverted person is living in Japan, the person would adapt to the culture of Japan easier than an introverted person. And an extroverted person living in USA will adapt quickly to the culture of USA in comparison to an introverted person. So this is, these are two distinct ways we can see even in biology of people, the adaptation. Now, here, one important question that we need to discuss is that, is it that proclivity or particular temperament to adaptation, is it something which comes before the need for adaptation? So, like, there is this environment, and environment always pressures you or pushes you or demands adaptation. And then there is you as an organism who adapt or who are forced to adapt. So your characteristic way of adapting, is it before the need for adapt, or the characteristic way develops in response to the need for adaptation? So this is very important question to consider, because it gives us an idea whether type or type differences are biological or pre-existing before the need for adaptation. Is it interaction of environment that gives you a type, or you come with a type, you're born with a type, and then you explore, develop, and manifest your type in your adaptation? So the way Jung approached this is that he took the example of children, and he said that if you observe children at very early age, when there is not very much pressure from the environment to adapt, they display distinct style of adaptation. Some children become more attuned, more connected to the changes in their immediate external environment, while other children seem to be less connected with the external environment. They seem to be more into their own world. So this gives an hint that maybe adaptation comes before. Now, let's take this hypothesis that maybe it is possible that the adaptation, the style of adaptation develops as a consequence of interaction with the environment and the organism, and it has no pre-existing template. Now, if that is the case, then there will be no neuroticism in the world, because neuroticism develops when your preferred way is not accepted by the environment. Then it is pushed into unconscious, and then it comes into the form of something which is having a physical symptom without any physical cause, or having some tension without having any specific reason for having tension, having anxiety without knowing the cause of it. So all this kind of neuroticism will not be coming if there is no template, if there is no conflict, there is no question of neuroticism. So seeing these two things, like children adapting to the environment and grown-up people having neuroticism, it kind of provides a proof that maybe there are pre-existing template of adaptation to the world. And this pre-existing template is either introversion or extroversion. So there are two predominant kind of templates. And Jung explored this into quite deep, because in the first beginning of almost 6 to 8 years, when he started noticing this extroverted and introverted tendencies, 6 to 8 years he spent only on understanding and watching this extroversion and introversion in the patients that he was getting, where these tendencies are very much pronounced. So in the beginning, he was thinking that he had this notion that there is only extroverted and introverted people. So there are only two types of people. Later on, he discovered that no, there are different layers of psychological functioning, and there are actually total 16, eight psychological functioning and 16 types of people. And later on, this everybody, you know how this theory of Myers and Briggs was developed based on that. Though there were other authors also working on the same time, like Keirsey, for example, who was very, very separate from Myers and Briggs. He was working on roughly the same idea. Then now let's look at the idea of extroversion and introversion in consciousness, like in the psychological domain. So we have seen the biological domain, now psychological domain. Now, psychologically, as we have discussed, I think in the introduction in the first session also, that there is two distinct ways of responding to the situation. One is that responding to the objective fact presented by the situation. So, for example, it is dangerous out there. It is cold out there. Somebody is expressing affection towards you. These are objective situations. So there are two ways the organism or human beings react or respond to this kind of objective situation. One is that there is a stimulus and there is response. There is nothing in between. This is extroverted way of responding. So extroversion as a tendency concerns itself with the perfect adaptation and being in tune with the outside. So whatever is happening in outside, the person is responding to it on the face value of it. So there is a kind of obsession or some kind of liking or some kind of flowing towards the object. An object here means the external world of people, objects and things. Then there is another kind of responding to the outside situation, which is seeing the objective fact, but not really responding to the objective fact, but also taking into account the subjective influence that it has, that it creates on you. So somebody is displaying affection to me. Now, there are two ways that I will respond to that affection. One is that I will respond to that affection as it coming to me, and my response is going directly. So there is nothing in between. There is another thing is that affection is stimulating or it is triggering some feelings, some thoughts, some drives, some needs in me. So I look at that, understand that, and then adapt from that perspective or respond from that perspective. That is introversion. So extroversion is energy, or let's say ego's way of using the libido or using the connecting the libido with the outside world. And introversion is ego's way of connecting the libido with the outside world, but both are concerned with the healthy or unhealthy adaptation to the reality. So to both subjective reality as well as objective reality. So for an extroverted type, the actions are always in response to the external demand. So they don't focus much on what the external demand generates in them subjectively. So what feeling comes, what thought comes, what needs arise, they don't look at that. So what happens is that people who are too much extroverted, they ignore their individual needs. They tend to overlook their own opinion. They tend to ignore their own subjective values. what they prefer, what they don't prefer. They try to kind of fit in, they try to gel in. And that's why, when you see an extroverted person, you clearly see that the person is trying to fit in. The person is trying to kind of be accepted. An introverted person might have need of being accepted, need of being fit in, but the response will not be in the reaction to the stimulus or objective environment, but the response will always be moderated by that need. So an extroverted person will respond to the situation as it is and try to connect with the object. Introverted person will have a filter between stimulus and the response. And that actually gives, that explains why, introverted people are a little slow in expressing their own thought, because a lot goes inside the head before they say something. And that also explains sometimes why introverted people, if there is no other stimulus or no other environmental constraint available, then their sentence formation is kind of very complex and very long. But when other people are there, when they have to talk and about their ideas and thoughts and feeling, they put a lot of, censor a lot of evaluations before they say something. So they become slow, they become more factual or more matter of fact in their way of communicating. So now let's get into a little deeper into the extroversion and introversion, and connect it with what will happen if extroversion is exercised. What kind of traits, what kind of patterns of thinking, feeling, and behavior will be developed. So through extroversion, ego develops traits like sociability, liveliness, gregariousness. Expansive mean, trying to kind of be bigger, be larger, be more available, like having lots of friends, lots of connects. These are the people who try to have the maximum number of connection possible on any social media. And multiplicity, multi-level marketing kind of stuff. So that's typical expression of extroversion in form of patterns of behavior. And through introversion, the ego develops traits like reflectivity, containment, quietude, depth, and monopoly. So through extroversion, what develops is a kind of deep-rootedness, a kind of having deep, meaningful connections, not having the number of connection. So that's different way. So now, if we look at it together, what we are today is the sum total of how our preferences or how our ego has extroverted and introverted till now. So if that has been as per our innate preference, it will be a healthy personality. If that has been in contrast to our preference, but to the demand of the situation, that is likely to create some kind of conflict, some kind of problems in the personality. So now let's look at the habitual use of this attitude and what it develops. So through extroversion as an attitude, if practiced regularly, it develops extroverted type. And extroverted type, being habitual, develops, makes extroverted person. So that's the relationship. And then the introversion is subordinated to that in healthy development of personality. So it's like you have two ways of orienting to the world. One is that you orient to the world through an objective way, looking at the world as it is. and trying to adapt to it and taking joy in adaptation. So there are some things which I know from my practice of working with people, is that if you want to know whether you are more extroverted and introverted, just ask yourself after a conversation, do you feel more energetic, or do you feel like you are drained up? That's one. And then what you dream for. It's like, do you dream being alone, or do you dream being with people? If you dream being alone while being with people, most probably you are extroverted. If you dream being with people when you are alone, most probably you are introverted. It goes the counterintuitive, like it goes counterintuitive, because what we understand extroversion is generally, being attuned to more people, but it's not the truth. It's not how it works. Okay. So if extroversion and introversion as way of adaptation are left to their own devices, means they are left like that, what will happen naturally is that ego, due to the inborn preference, will use one more than the other, and the one which will be used more will become stronger, 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 and stronger. So the personality development will be one-sided unless there is a conscious attempt by ego, or by you as a person, to be aware of that functioning, to be aware of your own functioning. So once you become aware of the functioning, then what happens is that whatever functioning is going on in you, it becomes more conscious, and the unconscious part of it pushing into the unconscious. So if extroversion is being developed, introversion will be put into unconscious. That pushing doesn't happen that strongly, or it sometimes it reverses also. So that leads to healthy development of personality. But if it is not into awareness, then it develops into one-sided personality, and that explains basically the conflict between two strong personalities and two strong people. Both are right in their own sense, but they refuse to look at the perspective of each other. And most of it can be attributed to their temperamental differences of orienting towards the outside world, considering outside as the truth, or orienting towards inside world and considering their own thoughts and feelings and ideations as the truth and operating from that perspective. So let's look at it. When this thing happens, how different kind of, let's say, healthy and unhealthy processes or psychological things develop. Okay, but before we get into that, I think I lost my mind a little. We need to clear some common misconception about extroversion and introversion. And I want to create, clear two of them. One is, there is a general belief that extroverts are good at talking and introverts are good at writing. Or extroverts enjoy talking and introverts enjoy writing. Something like that. This is actually, if we look at talking and writing as capacity, then introversion, extroversion has no role to play. If we look at talking and writing as a preference, then extroverts prefer to talk out. Why? Because it's easy. Because in less time you can say more. And introverts prefer to write. Why? Because it gives them the time to structure or evaluate the external reality as per their internal structure. It's for that reason. And those people who have who have been developing, let's say, who have been trying to live more consciously and develop more awareness into their functioning, they start liking. If they are extroverted, they start liking. If they are introverted, they start liking the, sorry, if they are extroverted, they start liking the writing. If they are introverted, they start liking the talking part of it. So talking and writing as such is not an indication whether the person is extroverted or introverted, but the person's experience in talking and writing and the kind of talking and writing the person does, or the subject that person chooses to talk or write about, that gives very clear-cut indication whether the person is extroverted or introverted. And many times what happens is that to an observer, it's very clear whether this person A is extroverted or introverted. But for the person himself, if the person is not aware enough, then for the person himself or herself, it's not very clear. There is a lot of confusion. And the second thing is that you can do this as I discussed in the session. Like, you can do this as an experiment with people you know. You ask them, what do you think about the current situation of this coronavirus lockdown? And what are you doing to adjust or adapt? And by the responses, by looking at their responses, you can see clearly the extroverted and introverted functioning in that. So it's the same situation for everybody, roughly same. But the response to that situation would be different depending upon what has been their way of looking at it. And people cannot help but looking at from their perspective, because that's the only perspective they know. Only difference is that people who become aware of this functioning of ego, then they can switch easily between extroversion and introversion. And that's part of the healthy personality development. Otherwise, personality develops as its own scheme. Whatever your preferred function, it develops into consciousness. Whatever is unpreferred function, it is pushed into unconscious, and there it creates all kind of psychodrama. Now, I think this is the crux of the whole, the total idea of extroversion and introversion. If you have to take one thing from this whole presentation, I would suggest to take this one. So, outer and inner are not opposites but complementary. It is a big misconception that extroversion is in opposition to introversion. There are some tendencies in psyche which are in opposition to each other, but not extroversion and introversion. Thinking and feeling are in opposition to each other, always. They create a lot of tension. But extroversion, introversion are not in opposition to each other. So these are two attitudes, two ways of dealing which are juxtaposed, like put into opposition by the ego. Because what ego does, it wants to conserve the energy. It wants to, do the least and be most effective. That's the purpose of ego. It's a reality principle. It's the thing that regulates the psychological energy. So in order to maximize your use of energy, the ego uses extroversion or introversion, and not both at the same time, because that will be like getting crazy. And it uses predominantly one than the other based on your inborn preferences, which are basically generally stored in the collective unconscious part. But then that I will touch upon some other time. So one way of looking at extroversion and introversion, to look at it as like right hand and left hand. Your right hand and left hand are not opposite to each other. Though we use it right and left as opposite, but you need both. to be a fully functional human being. You will use one more than the other, but you need both. Same way as a bird need both, wings to fly. A person need both right and left leg to walk, right? Jung put this idea of extroversion, this preference of extroversion and introversion, with the forward and backward movement of libido, and explained how, with the progression and regression of libido into extroversion or introversion, leads to different kind of adaptive and maladaptive functions. So here is a small presentation of that. I'm going to just read it now. So libido moves forward, which is into progressive movement in outside world, and forms adaptation to the conditions of the outside world, developing healthy adaptive individual. When libido moves forward in the inside world and forms adaptations to the condition of the inside world, it develops healthy and self-aware individual. So adaptive individual is result of healthy forward movement of libido in the outside world. Self-aware individual is result of healthy forward movement of libido in inside world. If libido moves backward into the outside world, then it forms unhealthy individual who are indulgent with the matter and who display flamboyance and show off. So all the substance abuse is basically, psychologically, it is libido moving backward. Later on, Jung said it that instead of forward backward movement, he used the life instinct and death instinct. In fact, Freud also talked about it in the later years of his life, is that he was talking first about life instinct and then he said death instinct. So death instinct is nothing but libido moving backward. There is an interesting concept of involution and evolution in Indian psychology related to that, which I found more comprehensive and more structured. But then we'll come back to that later in some other session or some other time. So when libido moves backward into the inside world, it forms fantasies and wish work. So instead of being aware of your needs, your feelings, your thoughts, you see them when libido moves backward into the internal world, you see them as mere fantasy and wish work, rather than having real thoughts, feelings, and needs. And then it creates unhealthy individuals who assume a moral superiority and unsubstantiated assumptions about their ability. So this basically reflects into people who claim to be better or morally superior than other people, simply because they think that they are, not substantiated by any kind of either subjective or objective fact, but simply because they think that they are morally superior. So this healthy and unhealthy development, and basically in terms of adaptation, can be seen and can be explained through the idea of extroversion and introversion. Now, let's look at the dynamics, how this happens, both into the consciousness and into the unconsciousness. And this is like the zenith of this presentation. And after that, we will talk about little about the, how it reflects in the outside world. And then that will be the end of it. Yeah. So for every unit of use of extroversion in conscious domain, there is equal push on introversion in the unconscious. So when ego uses libido in the outside world and connects itself with the fact of the outside world, it pushes the inner world stuff like, thought, feeling, need, desires into unconscious. So when people respond to objective reality, they push their own individual needs, thoughts, and feeling down to the unconscious. And that makes a lot of sense, is that when you are engaged with the outside world, you don't care about your internal world. So it explains that, somebody getting obsessive with business growth works 18 and 19 hours a day, not paying attention to the need of the body, because even the body becomes external. Those who become better at adapting and responding to change, the better they become in responding and adapting to change, the more disconnected they become with their self. That's the natural flow. That's the natural consequence of it. If it is happening on its own, and this is very important, I think this is the part which Jung emphasized later on, but he did not emphasize it well enough in the psychological type, and up to at least up to 1920, 25, 26, up to the publication of psychological types book, that if this is happening on its own device, like the natural way of libido using the energy in outside world is that if it is going into the outside world to adjust with the reality, it will push your own individual needs and thoughts and feelings into the unconscious. So since they are deprived of energy, they will be, resting in the unconscious and trying to come out from in some form someday. So they will become primitive in nature. So your needs, your thoughts, and your feelings, they become primitive in nature. And then they come out as fantasy, as wish, as some kind of hallucination, all other things. But then it is important to remember again here is that Jung was working with, mentally disturbed people. So he could see those things very clearly. Not all healthy individuals, or not all individuals reach to that state where, it's pushed so much and it has accumulated so much that it comes out like that. For every unit of use of introversion in the conscious domain, there is equal push on extroversion in the unconscious. So if ego is diverting libido to the introverted domain, all the extroverted domain stuff, it will push into unconscious. For example, if a person is responding to the objective reality from the subjective point of view, then realistic appreciation of the object will be pushed down to unconsciousness. So those who respond to the world from not how the world are, but how they are, and they do it consistently, they lose the real touch with the reality. An example is that I want freedom of mind, and I'm very much aware of that need of me in wanting freedom of mind, freedom of thoughts, and you can see that in the modern liberals is that, freedom of expression, I don't put a barricade on my thought. Then those who develop like that, what they ignore is the objective fact of financial dependence. So they kind of tend to repress the fact, the reality of financial dependence of their survival on others. And then it keeps on, it's like this, I want freedom of mind, but at some level I realize, at some unconscious level, that I'm financially independent. So I will develop some kind of compensatory mechanism to get, rid of that conflict. And those compensatory mechanisms are generally come in form of condemning the financial system. and saying that money is bad. And that's what happens. That happens in almost all the cultures, is that those who are more philosophical in nature, those who are more highly moral standard, at least they presume to be for themselves, they always condemn the money, the objective, or let's say the material wealth and material progression. So be better at ideation, connected with different layers of yourself. And then if you do that, there are higher chances that you will be disconnected with the object and developed a contempt for anything material. So people who become more self-aware, not self-aware, people who become more conscious to their need, their individual subjectivity, their individual opinion thought, and not consciously but kind of in an automated way, they develop at the same time a contempt for material growth and progression and material adaptation. So then it looks like if you develop this side, you will lose something important there, and if you develop that side, you will lose something important there. So what is the healthy way of development? Now, from the onset of it, it looks like maybe 50-50. Like 50% of the time we should consciously extrovert, 50% of the time we should consciously introvert. But then that will create a lot of tension. And those who try to do that creates a lot of tension. And it will lead to a constant struggle between the, whether we should go extroversion, use extroversion or use introversion. So this is not the solution. Like, not the solution means this is not a healthy way of development. So 50-50 is not the way. So then what is the way? The way is being more aware, identifying, connecting with yourself as well as outside world, and identifying your own preferences, your own way, characteristic way of dealing. So for example, for me, myself, I'm more introverted person as such. So I get energetic when I talk to people, and I feel like draining my energy when I'm talking to camera like this. So developing awareness into that, and being kind of, seeing that in you, and then living your life in such a way that the other part is not totally neglected, but also kept in awareness from time to time, that develops healthy personality. So for an extroverted person, the healthy personality will be being social, being amicable, being agreeable, and being into the field which value those kind of things. At the same time, developing time, having some me time, having some time of connecting to your needs, connecting to your thoughts, connecting to your feelings, and writing them, expressing them, reading, all that sort of thing, that develops healthy extrovert. For introverted person, being driven by the subjective reality, being driven by your own inner vision, but at the same time being aware of the external constraint, external environment, and being very careful of not condemning it, not assuming a moral superior position. That's the biggest danger of introversion. And in almost all scriptures, it is discussed in length, is that how people who assume a moral superior position end up being super duper corrupted and end up being attached to the very thing that they are condemning. So it is not difficult to find people who say, especially it happens in India a lot. There will be some Baba, some Guru who would be saying that, look, the whole world is Maya. Money is bad. It leads to a lot of violence, a lot of death, a lot of bad things. So you come here, give your money to me, and you take the knowledge, you take this bhakti, you take whatever they are offering. So at one hand they are saying money is bad, at the other hand they are inviting people to give them money, and they don't see that. They don't see this, that they think this is something which is contradicting in themselves. So they get attached to the same materialism they are preaching against. And being aware of it, being cautious, being conscious, putting that into awareness is the way of healthy development, as it looks to me till now, of all the understanding and work that I have done. Yeah. So now, last thing, we will look at how extroversion and introversion appear in the work in healthy and as well as unhealthy manner. A healthy extroversion and introversion displays itself in the way people adapt and maladapt. So if you see healthy adaptation or unhealthy adaptation, the reason or the source of it could be found in the extroverted introverted tendencies. And I would like to quote two examples here of unhealthy adaptation. And one example actually Jung discussed in his book on this one, volume 8, which basically talks about the dynamics of psyche. He says that there was a businessman who came to Jung for some kind of treatment of some mental problem. What happened that that guy was having a high preference for introversion by birth, but due to the social conditioning, social environment, he was pushed to extroverted attitude, and the person did very well, phenomenally good, because it doesn't matter whether you are extroverted or introverted. If you, whatever you do, you will become great at it. If you do extroversion, you will become great at extroversion. If you practice cello playing for 50 years, no matter how bad you are at the beginning, you will be far better. It's whatever you do, you become good at it. It's as simple as that. So that businessman created a very good business. And what happens when you develop something into the area which is not your own area, you enjoy all the fruits of it. You see that it is working. It gives you some kind of internal satisfaction. But at the same time, there is always a voice in your head which says, but that's not me. That's not my house. That's not my thing. So when his business became very successful, he started rediscovering himself, and he started looking at what he used to enjoy, and he found that he used to enjoy a lot of creative work, especially in terms of drawing. So rather than keeping it as a hobby, which would have been healthy, he tried to put that into his business and make that as the core of his business. And then what happened? His business disconnected with the demand or reality of the market, and it connected with his own individual self-exploration. And the result is very obvious, as you can guess. The business disappeared, and the person got into a lot of tension and neuroticism, and then went to Jung. Then the same can be observed in the introverted artists who repeatedly demonstrate a contempt for money. So the way it happens is that an artist starts becoming and producing something like a real good work, a work of art, a work of internal world, and that work gives a lot of fame, success, and other things. And then that if the artist is extroverted in nature, then what will happen is that after the first big work, the quality of the work, the actual quality which led him to that kind of success, will disappear, and the person will go get more into the marketing kind of stuff. Means expanding that the message, rather than focusing on the quality of the message. The person will focus more on the expanding of the message. So this is quite visible in people who are like, how to present it. It's like who have some kind of artistic tendency, and they become so much pathologically attached to that they develop a contempt for something which is real in the external world, and then they end up going into mental asylum. We can see this as in the unhealthy development in some kind of self-styled gurus who always condemn the materialism and their flamboyance and love for BMW. Everybody knows that. So this is introversion went wrong. Is that inside of them they somewhere see that it is not really of value, but at the same time they put the objective real value of it into unconsciousness, and they become obsessed with the same thing that they did not want to become with. And you can see another example of maladaptive is when business coaches who have done no business claim to found the key to success. This is typical extroversion went wrong, because the extroverted attitude tries to find the final solution, the one theory which explains everything, or the one thing which everybody should know to become whatever they want to. So these are some examples. So tomorrow we will discuss sensing and intuition, and through that I will put this into like sensing when extroverted, sensing when introverted, intuition when extroverted, intuition when introverted. And I would like to aim to cover the thinking and feeling functions also, and then that will give even better picture of the whole dynamics of personality and how it works. So see you tomorrow. Thanks. 52 minutes.